Hello and welcome back, Chelsea fans, to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. Our third this week, but 1 millionth over the summer that we're about to embark on for sure. We are, of course, going to be talking about Chelsea 99.9% appointing Enzo Maresca as the new manager, silly season heating up, and so much more. Even some Chelsea women developments that have happened over the last day and a half. But today I'm very excited to be joined by Ben Jacobs. Ben, it's been a long time since we've seen you stateside. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Silly season, as you say, about to begin, but always a pleasure connecting. And hey, hopefully we'll get to do it again face to face in America in pre-season.
There we go. That's what I'm talking about. They have another handful of matches they're going to put on, so we'll see. Just before we dive into the action, of course, calls to action. Appreciate this community more than you guys know. 5-star reviews, Apple Podcasts, Spotify helps episodes like this get seen by even more people. Subscribe on YouTube, doing a lot of good work over there. And of course, if you missed Sam's dispatch from yesterday, shame on you because it was excellent. You absolutely need to dive into that. And he will be doing a Enzo Maresca more tactical view with Dan here in the coming days as well. But of course, one thing to just remind everyone about is, during the summer, our schedule does get a little weird. We're going to try and be as consistent as possible on dates of release. But as you know, Ben, the news waits for no man. And of course, on bank holiday on Monday and Memorial Day in the States, we learned that Chelsea had basically made their move. Enzo Maresca, of all the candidates, was chosen. We will, of course, talk about him as a particular manager here in a second. But I want to start off with the process because I think that is something that a lot of people have questions, comments, concerns about as you kind of talk through who is running the process, how it all went down, the profile of the manager that the sporting directors and the ownership were looking for. Can you kind of break that down for us in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, it was quite a fast process. And I think part of that is because Chelsea were succession planning, which is what well run clubs do. So you can only create a short list of several and then whittle them down to, I'm told, 4 names, including Roberto De Zerbi, if you've done your due diligence. So succession planning is running the data, internal meetings, understanding who might be open to the move, but not actually starting an interview process because at that point, Maurizio Pochettino's future was still undecided. Then you're able to move seemingly really fast because of all of that due diligence. Then we got the shortlist. And what's clear from those that made it to the final stages is that all of them either have managed in the Premier League or have had experience of working in the Premier League. So English football experience was really important. And then you have Kieran McKenna. There's two sides to that story. From Chelsea's point of view, they ruled him out and they called him personally, which they thought was a very classy gesture to do. But remember, McKenna has had an option for Brighton, and some say at the time of recording, we don't know if there's a vacancy at Manchester United, but that may have been an option. And I talk past tense because the understanding is that very imminently it's going to be official that he's signed a new deal at Ipswich. So if McKenna's not waiting for Manchester United and the Ten Hag review, and in addition is not going to Brighton, then some of his reluctance to take the Chelsea job is potentially down to the fact that he'd made up his mind to stay at Ipswich as well. Otherwise, if we discount Chelsea, logically, he'd still be talking to Brighton. He'd still be waiting to see what happened at Manchester United. So Chelsea's position is very much Enzo Maresca became the unanimous choice, and therefore they called Kieran McKenna and said, you were close, we respect you, but you're not going to get the job. But there will be a McKenna side to that as well. And then with Thomas Frank, he was always a little bit further down the pecking order. But one advantage is that he's heavily reliant on data, a relatively strong stylistic fit, and he's worked already with Bernardo Cueva. So there's synergy between the new set piece department and potentially Frank had he come in. But Enzo Maresca got the job after a healthy debate over about 48 hours. So this isn't only about Chelsea having yes men and women within the hierarchy, the board, the senior leadership team. This was about a debate leading to Maresca being seen as the right fit, football wise, personality wise, and strategy wise. And then from there, they were able to move very quickly in order to start those conversations. But still, you have to agree compensation with Leicester for Maresca and the backroom staff. And all of that kind of back and forth at the time we're recording is coming to a head, to the point where we can now say that Enzo Maresca will be the next Chelsea manager, and we just have to wait for the official confirmation.
Ben, I was thinking about kind of the very small gap between when Maurizio Pochettino and the club depart by mutual consent, which is, of course, the party line out there. They actually do some press together, which is an interesting departure technique for outgoing managers. And then this briefing comes out that Chelsea are have a list of kind of qualities that they're looking for in a new manager, right? That this person is relatively young, that they adopt a possession based style, so on and so forth, right? You kind of get this out there in the world. And I talked to Matt Law last week, and he he kind of goes like, everything kind of feels like the upside down right now. Like there are all these incredibly qualified, successful managers out in the market, like maybe we haven't seen in a long time. And most clubs at the highest level are going for relatively young, unproven candidates to lead them forward, as opposed to kind of the standard manager merry-go-round. Do you get the same sense as you're seeing multiple managerial vacancies open, that there are maybe there's a different tact being taken across the board in football?
Yeah, only because the older managers have done things one way, and football constantly evolves. And the way that models, anyway, have evolved now are in a very collaborative way. So you need your manager to be head coach, and you need your head coach to be very football focused and very planning based, and work closely with a recruitment team as a voice, but with no kind of autonomy or veto. And also, you need a manager or head coach, whatever the club and the model is, that's prepared to invest, even if they didn't pick the target or have that much say in the pitch to get the player. And you need a head coach that is very strong with not only man management and squad development for the now, but also the future as well. So with Maurizio Pochettino, there were examples where, due to Chelsea's injury crisis, young players were called up to the squad, or a player like Casadei, who obviously was under Maresca at Leicester, came in. And then the next week, when a few came back, they were out again, and not even in all cases training anymore with the senior squad. And sometimes when that happens, players feel that they've been demoted, even though actually they were just promoted out of necessity, and then they return to their development outside of the senior team. But when that has happened at Leicester under Maresca, he's been very clear with players to pull them aside, to give them an explanation, to show them some encouragement. So his man management is strong, and it will extend well beyond only the first team. And that's one of the qualities that Chelsea are looking for, because they need pathways. The other thing about his role to understand is that it has to be connected with the project, not just the now. So, number one priority, qualify for Champions League. Everything Chelsea fans will look at is now. And in fairness, because the squad will be a year on and the project is also maturing, you can argue that expectations next season have to remain high. After all, it's Chelsea Football Club. But when you hire the manager, you know that part. And every single manager will have the same brief: go and get Champions League football, try and win the Club World Cup, because the money doubles if you can go very far in that tournament. Obviously, the UEFA Europa League could be something that allows Chelsea to complete the full slam of silverware, or whatever we want to call it. And then they got to Wembley twice in a semi-final and a final in the FA Cup and League Cup, respectively. So there's a yardstick arguably there. as well. And all of these things will be what the fans focus on, which is why when Thomas Tuchel departed as Champions League winner, there was shock and disappointment, which is why when Graham Potter came in and couldn't get any instant impact and Chelsea went out of the Champions League, he ended up leaving, which is why with Mauricio Pochettino, despite the momentum, in the end, sixth wasn't seen as good enough. But none of the departures of the previous managers were only down to football reasons, because Chelsea are also looking at Cobham, the relationship with the senior leadership and the recruitment team, the personality, the strategic fit. And this is why Maresca has been given a longer term contract, because one of the bugbears of Pochettino as he developed at Chelsea, but he did agree to it from day one, was how can you say to a manager, believe in the future, if you're only actually on a contract for the now? And pretty much 6 months in, we knew about this end of season review. So Pochettino had no reason to care about Andre Santos, Kendry Paez, Esteval Willian, because he would have said, they're all basically arriving or going to be integral and playing for Chelsea after my current contract expires. Yeah. And this is why I think both Maresca and Chelsea, led by the two sporting directors, wanted to have that synergy between the length of the Maresca contract and the time they think it's going to take for this project to fully mature.
Interesting, though, right? Because you go from... obviously they moved on from Tuchel pretty early in their ownership, but you go to Graham Potter, who's very much seen as kind of the longer term project, was given a longer term contract, right? Obviously it doesn't work. You go through a couple of caretakers. You go to a completely different profile in Mauricio Pochettino, who does have that Premier League experience and does play let's just be honest, a different style of football than the more possession-based, outfit that they're hoping to see. And then they're kind of going back to the original thought here, potentially with Maresca. Can you just talk about this sporting director's role in this process and potentially, and this could just be me editorializing, how important it is to get this one right?
Yeah, it was important to get Pochettino right as well. And therefore, it's even more important to get the Maresca appointment right. And it can't be something that 6 months in or a year in, we're talking again about possible change or end of season review. Otherwise, you're in a position where the model would have to change. So right now, managers have had to fit into the model rather than models fitting into managers or head coaches. But that's a bit of a glib point to make because there's always a grey area. We may come on to it in a bit, but Maresca will influence how the recruitment team think about goalkeepers, because his goalkeeper is arguably the most important position on the entire football field. Some may argue inverted fullbacks and wingers are important, but it all starts with the goalkeeper. So therefore, that you have to listen to how the manager is going to set up tactically and what kind of clear identity he's going to bring. And it may change where the recruitment team put their priorities this summer. And that is an example of the influence of somebody like Maresca, even though he won't be in the room every single day saying yes to this player or no to that player. And again, this is how models work. Liverpool are exactly the same. You can't be like Chelsea and give everything to the manager, because if that manager keeps going after a year or 2 years, or even succeeds and like Klopp goes after 9 years, you're back where you started if you give too much autonomy to the manager alone. And therefore, the recruitment team and the leadership team will always protect the club. And the manager or head coach that comes in has to fit within that. But it's obviously vital that they now get this appointment right, because outside of Chelsea, the industry are starting to wonder whether or not there's a method to what some are calling madness. And I don't think that's too fair on Chelsea, because this is going to be the fourth window of a 4-window plan. And it's a young squad. And obviously, if you look when they first took over, it was super speed. Todd Boehly was sporting director. Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart and Joe Shields were not there. Sam Jewell's only just arrived. The set piece department is only forming now. They're, by the way, starting something they're calling an entertainment department as well, that will factor in fan engagement and events. I'm sure we'll see some of them in America, and all of their social media is going to morph into that as well. Stadium, is still in formative stages. So everything's developing. And at the end, I would say, of next season, when the vast majority of these young players have been at Chelsea Football Club for longer than a year, and we have full context, and we have the phase one of this 4-window recruitment plan done, it's a very fair time to judge the project. And also, we'll see the next financial year end, which means under PSR, there'll be 3 years of only Clearlake Bowley rather than 2 and the final Abramovich year, where the numbers are COVID adjusted and Chelsea were coming off the back of sanctions. So we'll start to see a full financial picture, a full squad picture, a full infrastructure picture, and Maresca will hopefully benefit from that. So it is vital they get it right. But even though fans will be sick of hearing it, it's vital they're patient with Maresca again, because if these foundations behind the scenes that are not as good as trophies and not as good as winning, and it definitely has appeared compared to Abramovich that the club is worse, not better on the field in the now, but that doesn't mean that things can't turn very quickly like they did under Pochettino in the last 5 games of the season. So Maresca can't be a flash in the pan. Otherwise, Chelsea will get a reputation as being a cutthroat club and other managers may be put off the job. And the belief within the club is that all of those foundations are maturing along with the young players. And Maresca is going to be the one to benefit from that, which is again why he's been given a long-term contract.
All right, well, we will do a deep dive into Enzo Maresca in the next segment. Just quickly want to pass it over to our sponsors. Thank you for the support, and we'll be right back. Look, Dan and I travel quite a bit for work, for pleasure, for whatever, and that means getting to watch Chelsea games can be a little bit more difficult than it should be, even when we're paying for, I don't know, count them 150 streaming services. Thanks to Nord VPN, we don't have that problem anymore. With a few clicks, we're up and running and able to watch the content that we already pay for, regardless of where we're at.
Look, NordVPN gets you hooked up. They've got 6,300 servers in 111 countries. That's right, 6,300 servers in 111 countries with an easy-to-use one-click connection that gets you safely and quickly connected so that you can get watching the content that you want from home anywhere on the road. If you want to get that best discount possible in the moment, go to nordvpn.com/London is Blue. Our link gives you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. That's 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast description.
Remember, just visit nordvpn.com/London is Blue today. All right, Ben, you did a bunch of reporting on the Maresca hire as we kind of entered into late last week, and then, of course, kind of getting more solid confirmation earlier this week that this is going to happen. Of course, as we're recording, just want to disclose this for future sake. Chelsea have not made a formal announcement to this point, and so we're doing as much speculation as I think anything else right now. But it seems as if, from all the reporting and all the sources and everything that's out there, that he is going to be the next head coach. You wrote that the club traveled down to Marbella to, enjoy his company and finalize some of the details. I'm sure that was a tough trip for them. I really feel for the whole sporting crew that had to trek down there for that. But, obviously there's going to be some compensation that's going to need to be paid to Leicester to kind of prize him away as they join the Premier League again. Can you just talk about the hire itself and all of the kind of pertinent details that Chelsea fans should look out for?
So we understand it's a minimum 5-year guaranteed contract, which was something that I reported straight after Pochettino was sacked, that the aim was to ensure that the guaranteed part of the contract was longer than the one Pochettino had. And we've already explained why, because the length of manager contract has to match the length of this long-term project before it's stable and consistently successful on the football field. So now the manager doesn't have to say, well, why should I be patient when I've only got a year or 2 years to prove myself? The manager is aligned to the project. But that doesn't mean that it's going to take 5 years to get Champions League football or 5 years to win trophies. Chelsea expect high standards. So Maresca, like any football manager, will still be judged on results. And it's vital that he qualifies for the Champions League, and it's vital he does well in the Club World Cup. And if Chelsea ended up in mid-table mediocrity in 12 months' time, the 5-year contract won't mean that much. And there'll be clauses in there in terms of Chelsea's side to make sure that if they did somehow, and let's hope they don't, have to make a quicker change than anticipated, that it won't be some crazy payout. So it's a 5-year minimum contract on paper, but in practice, there'll be an out there for Chelsea without too much financial damage, which kind of allows them to have their cake and eat it. And Maresca was picked because both sporting directors, Lawrence Stewart and Paul Stanley, felt like he had the right mentality and identity to move this project along. And by mentality, I mean, at Leicester, he was quite rigid. He was quite forthright. So this isn't some up-and-coming manager that's been picked because he's going to be a yes man. This is a manager that on day one at Leicester walked in with a Cruyffian type philosophy, having also learned under Pep, and you'll definitely see some similarities in possession-based build-up to Manchester City. But on day one at Leicester, he said to that squad, this is the identity. It's going to be rigid. You're going to have to adapt. And in every single 11 versus 11 at Leicester's training facility, in all the preseason games, in all of the under-23s, under-21s and youth games, everything changed. So there's a connection, therefore, between youth all the way to the first team in style of play, in identity. And it was a culture shock for many of the Leicester players because they weren't used to that style. And one of the main things stressed by players that I've spoken to at Leicester is he's not a manager that wants to only think about when we're on the ball, we're going to do this, or when they're on the ball, you're going to shut them down. He's more about the big picture and spaces away from the ball. So you don't, when you're trying to win the ball back, press players, you press spaces. And when you're on the ball, you don't look only at where the player is. You look collectively at how you can advance the space. Like a game of chess, you're thinking 2, 3, 4 moves ahead. And there's almost an NFL aspect to it in the sense that when in NFL, you're just trying to get over the gain line and then you can start again with a bunch of downs, but you're in a better position than you were previously because you've won another first down. He almost thinks of it that way. It's patient. You keep the ball, you try and outmaneuver, you make clever runs. And Maresca's all about a footballer will only have the ball at his feet on average for 3 minutes or under. And in that other 87 minutes plus added time, it isn't only about saying, here's the ball, I'm going to time a run on the shoulder of the defender. It's about saying, how many movements can I make before I receive the ball? Because maybe it's on the left-hand side in defense and I'm on the right-hand side as a winger. But what do I have to do to just drag players out? Because eventually I'm going to be part of the phase of play. So he's very big on the space side of things. His squad knowledge also impressed Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart. He knew a lot about the first team, but also about academy players. He has a pre-existing relationship with Romeo Lavia and Cole Palmer. That's very useful. The 4-3-3 is seen as something that is significant as well. Thomas Frank had utilised that formation too, and Frank and Maresca both made the final two. So I think Chelsea feel like that might be a conducive formation to the talent they've got. It's quite hard actually to put the Chelsea players into the 4-3-3 because if you go in midfield, for example, and you decide it's Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo, well, he knows Lavia and he loves Lavia. And if Conor Gallagher stays, then everybody else, including Cole Palmer, is further forwards. But Cole Palmer's not going to be as effectively a wide right forward or winger. And then what about Nkunku? And then if Mudrik's on the left-hand side, does Nicholas Jackson lead the line or is he benched because a new striker comes in? So it's quite hard to put them in that formation. But I think the Chelsea leadership team were very impressed by his squad knowledge, his tactical acumen, and just overall is fit within the model. He's data-driven, didn't have that many injuries at Leicester, worked closely with the leadership team and the board at Leicester. And they like the fact he's forthright. They like the fact there'll be this challenge from him back towards the leadership in a very healthy and professional way. So most that don't know him will say, yikes, we've got the ex-Leicester manager, and haven't they just employed him because he worked under Pep? But there's far, far more to the appointment than only that.
I mean, you talk about tactically, and I know you put out a thread on Twitter. I'm not going to read the entire thread. I want people to go read it because I think it is really intriguing and definitely a departure from where Chelsea have been over the last year. You mentioned that build up and defense are kind of structured differently, that there's an emphasis obviously on keeping the ball. And in that way, offense is the best defense, right? If your opponent doesn't have the ball, they can't hurt you. We saw a lot of that approach under Thomas Tuchel, for example, where Chelsea were really, really possession dominant and barely allowed anything back. And so that was, a way to kind of protect players and to potentially, go create your own as well. You talked about the way that, there is a goalkeeper element to the buildup and to the defense, obviously, that is going to be maybe even more progressive than the way that Chelsea played out of the back last year, where it could almost become a zero in the goalkeeper traditional spot, and that goalkeeper moves out of the box and is essentially another outfield player, and so on and so forth. Is there one thing that you pull out of the tactical side that if we're fast forwarding our brains to August 15th, I think this was the first game of the season, that you're like, this is going to be the trademark? You need to prepare yourselves mentally and emotionally for this.
Yeah, you need to prepare yourself for a slower, methodical build-up. Leicester had the second highest possession in the Championship behind only Southampton. So if Maresca at Chelsea with more quality can keep the ball even more than at Leicester, then the aim will be around the 65 to 68% mark. And in games against lower ranked opposition, they might even have 75+% of the ball. But it won't always be in threatening positions. And fans are going to have to understand that a lot of players are going to get a lot of touches before anything appears to happen. And that's because the system sucks in opposition players. There's a lot of directional shifts. And then when the time is right, you see a progressive pass, you see speed. And then if big chances are taken, you realize that the whole purpose is to bend the opposition out of shape, starting from the back. So goalkeeper will spend a lot of time out the box. The fullbacks will be inverted, which is good news for Marc Cucurella. It'll be interesting to see how Reece James thrives in that role. I don't really have too many concerns about Malo Gusto being able to do that. And then in midfield, the centre-backs, because the goalkeeper joins the centre-backs, tend to go further forwards and at times become almost midfield destroyers. And it means if a centre-back can be the one that either has the ball or wins the ball back, then the midfield destroyers, which at Leicester were Harry Winks and Wilfred Ndidi, can play short, quick passes further forwards and don't always only have to think about controlling the rhythm, because the centre-backs and the goalkeeper can do that as well. So that can give them a little bit more freedom. And I think the system will get the best out of the Lavias, the Fernandezes, and the Caicedos, maybe even Uguachukwu as well. And therefore, because of all of that, when it does cross over the halfway line, number 8s are given huge power to attack and freedom. And Kenan Dewsbury-Hall at Leicester found he had an outstanding season because of that, with 12 goals and 15 assists in all competitions. Then Chelsea fans are going to have to get used to wingers. Maresca's obsessed with wingers. And that's what I mean about the 4-3-3 and whether or not he opts for wide forwards, which goes against his style, or wingers. And you could actually make an argument that a Noni Madueke and a Mikhailo Mudryk, and I'm only talking about players that are at Chelsea now rather than speculation over wingers that may join, they're more Maresca-like, comparative perhaps to a Sterling or a Jackson playing as a wide left forward. So there's big decisions to be made about that front three. But what we're going to see is a very clear identity, very rigid and concise instructions to the players during pre-season. Chelsea having a whole lot of the ball, not that many counter-attack goals. There was a game that Leicester won against Birmingham City 3-2. And they scored 2 late goals, and they were both on the counter-attack, and everyone went nuts, and it was a brilliant win. And then after the game, Maresca said, look, I'm happy with the win, but I'm actually not overly happy about the manner in how we got both goals because we're not a counter-attacking side. And when we're doing things right, we're bossing the game, we're defending well, we're protecting the back line, and only maximum 5 or 10% of our goals will be counter-attack goals. So that means that as the control and the identity comes from the back, Chelsea's fast, wide players are also, like the fan base, going to have to be patient. They're going to have to check runs. They're going to have to, when they are not receiving the ball and long before they're going to get it, think about dragging players out of position and making runs solely for the purpose of bending the opponent out of shape rather than receiving the ball immediately. And then once it clicks that there's a benefit at the end of that and they get the ball and they do well, everybody should be on the same page. But it is a slightly different approach philosophically and tactically to under Maurizio Pochettino.
Ben, one player I'm really interested in as it pertains to setup, and I know we have a long way to go. He hasn't even been officially announced as the manager yet, so we'll just take a little bit of speculation here. Is how someone like Maresca will get the best out of Enzo Fernandez. I don't think it's unfair to say that we haven't seen the absolute best of Enzo at Chelsea yet. There are, of course, extenuating circumstances as to why, and this will now be his fourth manager, I think, at Chelsea in as many. In essentially a year and a half. So a lot of tactical changeover during that time. But can you talk about how someone like Maresca could potentially get the best out of someone like Enzo and maybe where he'll slot in?
Yeah, I think first of all, let's wait and see what Enzo's like after his operation, because he said that he was playing through pain. And that's maybe one reason why we didn't quite see the best out of him. But everyone knows how outstanding he was at the World Cup with Argentina. And that's the Chelsea idea, that they paid an amount based upon that World Cup Enzo. And there's still no doubts within the club that he can get there very quickly, especially when fit. The difference between Maresca and Pochettino is Pochettino was playing Enzo Fernandez with Moises Caicedo in a 4-2-3-1. And Enzo Fernandez needs energy and pace around him, because although by athlete standards, we can't call him slow in any way, by midfielders in his position, he doesn't rank the highest for speed comparative to other elite midfielders that are like for like. So Enzo's qualities are in winning the ball and distribution and his positional sense. And when he was playing with Moises Caicedo, Chelsea lacked a bit of energy. They lacked a bit of chemistry because essentially Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez are the same player. So in a 4-3-3 with 3 midfielders rather than only 2, and then a front line of 3 in front, I think it's fair to say that Enzo Fernandez will be complemented by those around him. And I still think it's possible to play Caicedo plus Enzo Fernandez, and then you've got one more. But also, what you have to understand is that the inverted fullbacks will be cutting into midfield and offering Enzo Fernandez more protection and in more central areas, as opposed to overlapping and leaving the centre of the park exposed. So Maresca will be looking at Enzo Fernandez and trying to get him to distribute the ball quicker, to play more progressive passes. And in many ways, it's the same instructions that were given to Harry Winks at Leicester, who was told to push further forwards because the centre-backs are going to be further forwards. And then, when he wins the ball, to look up quickly and play a progressive pass. And then, if successful, be able to move forwards to the edge of the box to be involved in attacking phases. So I would expect Maresca to be saying to Enzo Fernandez, let others be the pace and let others be the energy. You be the intelligent, savvy one that wins the ball or receives the ball, distributes it quickly. Usually the passes that Winks played were short and fast. And then once you've got rid of it, move into the space further forwards because there will be protection behind you. And I think an Enzo playing like that will not only take to the system, but can get back to the kind of player that we saw when he won the World Cup with Argentina.
One thing that's had some reporting on it, I don't think we'll know until the official announcement, but there's been some reporting that, Enzo has a decent sized staff. I wouldn't say like Antonio Conte sized staff, for example, but a decent sized staff. Apparently 7 of his staffers will be on the way, plus Bernardo Cueva, who is already kind of pre-signed in this role. You have Willy Caballero, as you mentioned before, as the assistant manager. You have Danny Walker as a coach. You have Michel Bernardin as goalkeeper coach, Ben Roberts as goalkeeper coach and head of global goalkeeping, which I would love to understand the difference in those two roles. Marcos Alvarez as fitness coach, obviously Bernardo Cueva as set piece coach, Javier Molina Caballero as the analyst, and then Robert Vitello as development coach. Can you talk about, why having all of these pieces to the puzzle is important for Maresca's success at Chelsea? One caveat for me before you start is I've always found it odd when a club sign a manager and then haggle over the number of assistants that they can bring with them. Like, it seems like such small potatoes in advance of the, achieving the bigger goal. And I've always thought the more help that a manager has, the more comfortable they feel, the better the outcomes will be. But obviously there are finances involved with these things as well. So maybe just a little bit on that, and then the staff he's bringing.
And there's Leicester involved as well, because they may want to keep some of these staff for continuity. Not all of them are necessarily so tied to Maresca that they won't feel it's better for them to stay at Leicester as well. So there's club-to-club conversations and there's Maresca to backroom conversations. And at the time we're recording this, everything is still being finalised. So the names that you mentioned are expected to join him. Willy Caballero is the assistant, who obviously Chelsea fans know very well because he played for the football club. And number-wise, a lot just depends upon the coach, who may want a recruitment expert. Kyle McCauley and Graham Potter came together. And that's a good example of what I'm saying, that Graham Potter left. Kyle McCauley's still at Chelsea. So sometimes a backroom staff member will join in a very defined role and then simply want to stay because they like the club and the strategy. And backroom staff and analysts in data and recruitment experts, and I've used this analogy before, they're at times like civil servants in government. So your member of parliament in the UK and your political party will change, but the civil servants have tenure. And that means foundationally, as government runs, you have a lot of people that are just a part of the furniture, a part of the strategy, a part of the foundations. And in football, when that happens, if the manager changes, they won't always need to bring in all of their backroom staff or want to, because they may inherit very experienced people that they're looking forward to work with. But Maresca's new to management, and I think that's a key point to make, that he had 14 odd games at Parma and 1 full season at Leicester, and he's found a winning formula. So it's normal that he wants as many of them to come across as possible, because this is all still new to him. Whereas Vincent Kompany goes to Bayern and Craig Bellamy, his former assistant, won't join him. But Kompany's got more years under his belt now, even though he's still young. So he'll feel he can adapt with what he's inheriting and won't need as many. So the volume is down to the fact Maresca doesn't want to change a winning formula that he thinks he's found at Leicester. That's a big point in all of this. What does everyone do? Well, the titles are not that important at a club like Chelsea. It's again the relationship. So you don't want a coaching staff that say, we're at Cobham every day running through set pieces. We're not interested in what the set piece department think. There has to be synergy. And it's important that Maresca's staff understand the departments Chelsea are building, the data department, the strategy of the senior leadership, which technically is a department, the entertainment department, because they may be asked to make content, do things for the brand and PR, and that all helps add value to the football club. And then, of course, all of the stuff around Cobham, the medical department and the set piece department. And if these staff all come in and say, but at Leicester, we crafted the set pieces, but at Leicester, we did the video analyst, but at Leicester, we decided, along with only one doctor, whether or not the player was fit to play or not. We were not thinking about minutes projections. We were not thinking about prevention. If he does that, then he's not utilising the extra resources that Chelsea have compared to Leicester. So a high volume of backroom staff is useful because then Maresca can delegate and he can say, well, as head coach, I'm on the training ground, but maybe my assistant can actually speak to the data department and the medical department and relay it. And that was supposed to be how Potter worked, where Kyle McCauley was meant to be the middleman between Potter and the recruitment team, to the point where Potter could do football and McCauley would take all of the recruitment meetings and then feed back to Potter, and he wouldn't get sucked into too much beyond just football. It didn't work, of course, but that's not to say that that kind of structure isn't beneficial. And it's a similar thing now with Chelsea, and Maresca's prepared to embrace that. But to embrace that, along with the standard coaches you expect, he wants people like performance analysts, even though Bryce Kavanagh is there. He wants nutritionists because that allows him control over the main thing that he's being judged on, which is the football side.
We're a little bit of rapid fire here before we get into transfers, Ben. One pro of his appointment, one con of his appointment, and a to be decided that you're looking out for.
A pro of the appointment is that Enzo Maresca is incredibly thought after in the game. When you have Pep endorsing him, when you have Arteta endorsing him, when you have Manuel Pellegrini endorsing him, this for me is not as big a risk reward as some are billing it. And with many, many young top managers, when they first come in, we don't know that much about them. Jurgen Klopp, for example, leaving Liverpool, didn't arrive with the same reputation, nor does Arne Slot. Arsene Wenger joining Arsenal, same thing. Mikel Arteta, despite the fact that he was lauded as a player, had no managerial experience. And then off he goes to Arsenal and gets given a long-term project. And the ownership at Chelsea are looking at that pathway of Arteta and saying, why not with Maresca? And even though the fan base may be saying, we wanted De Zerbi, or why didn't you try for Xavi, or where was the interview for Ruben Amorim that never happened? Those in the industry at rival clubs really feel that Chelsea have got this appointment right. So that's the pro. The con for me is the three within the 4-3-3. Because if we are to presume Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo, and right now Conor Gallagher, and you got Romeo Lavia and Leslie Ukwachukwu, it's hard to see how all of the other players fit into that three within the 4-3-3 in the front line. So the con is that there may be certain players that aren't quite playing in their preferred position in order to force them into this system. And the to be decided is like a knock-on effect of that. How does Maresca reshape a player that right now we would say their best position is X, but he wants them to be Y? And that might be Reece James, inverted fullback. That might be Cole Palmer, wide right forward. Palmer could play in the midfield if he plays a 2 and a 1 in a 4-3-3. And I suppose so technically could Christopher Nkunku. But when you think Jackson, if a box office striker comes in, is going to be wide left or not starting. And Palmer, if he isn't in that midfield, is going to be wide right, and he's definitely going to be starting. And if he's in the midfield, then you suddenly start to question, is it going to be Enzo Fernandez, Moises Caicedo and Cole Palmer with a 2 and a 1 and 3 in front of them? But then where does Christopher Nkunku come in? And he would have to be wide right, and he's better behind the striker, or he's better in the centre leading the line. So the 4-3-3, particularly in the front line, compared to a 4-2-3-1, tends to provoke more questions than answers. And Maresca's going to have to be very quick in either redefining players or providing clarity as to where they're going to play.
All right. Well, that is a little bit on Enzo Maresca, and I say a little bit in jest. Obviously, we did a bit of a deep dive there. There's more to come, obviously, as we get to the official announcement and all throughout the summer on that. But we're going to turn our attention to silly season right after our last ad break. Stick around, and we will be right back. All right, Ben. We know silly season is already off and flying in many different areas. But before we get into specific players, I just wanted to quickly address PSR, FFP concerns. Obviously there's been a lot of talk over the last 2 or so months since Chelsea published their previous books that, there is a fair mountain to climb in this regard. Thoughts on kind of where we currently sit and how it can potentially impact the way that Chelsea do business this summer?
Yeah, I think with PSR, the feeling I get from sources is still that they're not that concerned about this current financial year. And that may mean that the 30th of June is not as big a deadline as maybe has been made out. So if within this financial year, Chelsea feel they're covered, then the priority will be the window at large rather than only up until the 30th of June. And that suggests that the financial year after this one is of concern, or it suggests that UEFA's financial fair play is the thing that they're really worried about. And that deadline is the 31st of December, not the 30th of June for every financial year. So Chelsea would actually have the whole summer in order to push sales and get some money on the books in order to fill the criteria under UEFA's financial fair play. And that means, again, the 30th of June isn't actually a particularly relevant deadline. So everyone's looking at it as Chelsea need to sell a bunch of players between now and the 30th of June. But if they're okay within this financial year, it's more likely that they're thinking about sales for next financial year, which means that they've got all of this window, they've got January, and they've got the first part up to the 30th of June of 2025, or it's all about financial fair play, the UEFA financial rules, and that's where throughout the entire summer, it's their last opportunity to bring in money, with the deadline being the 31st of December. So I don't think Chelsea are that panicked about 30th of June, this window, but I do think they need to bring in about 100 million of sales to both satisfy themselves under the different financial rules heading forwards and to make sure they've got enough money to spend within the market. Because regardless of the financial rules, if you want to bring in a striker, a centre-back, maybe 2 centre-backs, potentially a midfielder if Conor Gallagher leaves, a young left-back, and now very likely a goalkeeper, then the reality is you may need minimum 150 million, potentially double that, depending on what targets they go for. And saying we haven't got 150 to 300 million to spend is not the same as saying we're worried about breaches and charges and financial problems. It's just an astronomical amount of money in an inflated market that Chelsea have contributed to. And there's probably no Premier League club out there at the moment that has that kind of money lying around to spend in this window without making significant sales first. Man City are maybe the only one, but Arsenal came off the back of a big summer a year ago, so they're not going to be able to do it either without outgoings. So outgoings can be construed in 2 ways. One, for financial reasons and this so-called pure profit in the case of Conor Gallagher, but two, simply to raise enough capital to get in what is expected to be 5 senior names in an inflated market. And that's why I think that the outgoings will be spread less between the beginning of the window and only the 30th of June, and more across the entire window, either to fund their business or with UEFA's financial fair play in mind.
You talk about funding the business. You reported, I believe it was yesterday, that front of shirt sponsors still not sorted for next season, although ongoing talks with Infinite Athlete are happening. There's been plenty of rumors about specific airlines that are out there that are potentially on the hook as well. So can you just quickly talk about that as a revenue source and where you think Chelsea end up on that front?
Yes, with Infinite Athlete, the original deal was 1 year front of shirt sponsorship and then onto the sleeve of the training kit. So if that happens, it means that Chelsea have got a new front of shirt sponsor and a new shirt sleeve sponsor secured. And then Infinite Athlete's 7-year deal, of which we're a year into, carries on as planned. And the branding they get on kit is on the training kit. Infinite Athlete will also be the sponsor of the summer tour and the presenting partner as well. And that's always been pre-agreed. So they're not going anywhere, even though their social media appeared to tweet something that could have been construed as a goodbye. Yeah. And then was deleted and reposted for clarity. Front of shirt has still not been established. And Chelsea are in talks with, I'm told, 4 different partners. And it may be that an airline stands a likely chance of progressing. And there's long been rumours of Riyadh Air being a strong contender, a new Saudi airline that hasn't actually had a single flight yet, and are also the front of shirt sponsors for Atletico Madrid. So that could be one to watch. But there are some American companies as well that they're talking to as well. And the criteria for Chelsea is the front of shirt has to be what they consider to be immersive. In other words, they don't just want 50, 55 million from a partner. They want a partner that can offer them something that helps with fan engagement, such as Infinite Athlete powering their apps and syncing their data, or is maybe an airline or a bank. So there's something a bit more than just badging on the front of the shirt. There has to be a two-way relationship where Chelsea gets something out of the sponsor beyond just money, and they can do things together to grow the brand, which is what they wanted to do with Paramount Plus. And there were all manner of ideas for that partnership, but the Premier League ultimately blocked it and felt that there was a conflict, especially because Paramount Plus / CBS are not the Premier League rights holder in America. It's NBC. Right. So they want more than only a front of shirt sponsor. And this is why it's been difficult to find one and at the right value and in the absence of Champions League football. The shirt sleeve sponsor should be easier to get. And I think watch this space. But it is possible that Chelsea are in the same position as a year ago, where before they lock anything in, they do have to start the season again without any badging on the shirt. But if it got to that point, it might just be that Infinite Athlete renew for a year and then Chelsea look to find a new sponsor starting with the Club World Cup. And that's quite a nice carrot to have on the end of the stick, whereby you could renew Infinite Athlete if you felt that the money was good enough and you didn't have anybody long-term. And then you could stop Infinite Athlete at the end of the season. And then you could launch your new kit and head into the Club World Cup with a new sponsor. And the fact that new sponsor would be able to be a part of the inaugural World Cup might be of appeal.
Let's talk about outgoings, and then we'll talk about incomings and wrap this one up from a transfer perspective, Ben. There's been a ton of rumors out there about Connor and Trev being likely sales this summer. Also seeing some reporting that, they are valued at the club at the same time. It's very confusing to those who really appreciate their talents, such as myself. Any word so far on what their futures might hold?
I think Conor Gallagher is still up in the air. There's nothing advanced as far as a new deal is concerned. We know that Gallagher wants to stay. But as I've said many times, if everyone does their fit Chelsea 11 based upon potential, Gallagher will probably be in 50% of people's teams and not in the other 50%. And if the right offer comes, Chelsea will accept, and then it will be up to Gallagher. So we can't rule out a new deal, but I think there is still a likelihood that Conor Gallagher is sold. Tottenham are interested. Aston Villa are another one to watch. And if Newcastle lose Bruno Guimaraes, I expect them to be in the conversation as well. The price that Chelsea will ask for, though, is reflective of the fact they don't want to force Gallagher out in any capacity. It's about if it's right financially, then he will go, providing the player wants to, and the player will always have a say. And the number Chelsea will be looking for, I'm told, is 50 million or more. And when Tottenham wanted Gallagher previously, they were looking at 30 to 35 million. So given his contract has less time on it than when Spurs last came calling, someone's going to have to pay, in their mind, above the odds. Although Chelsea will point to Mason Mount, whose contract was ticking down, and they got a 55 million package for him. So in the context of previous Chelsea business, I'm sure that the leadership team and recruitment team at Chelsea would argue that that's good value, but other clubs may still be put off by Chelsea's valuation. And I also think, unless anything's being agreed as of now, then Gallagher's going to only be focused on the Euros anyway. So it might be one that drags on. With Chalobah, I'm told he wants to stay at Chelsea. We've heard reports in the last 24 hours about Manchester United maybe entering the race. Bayern under Tuchel really wanted Chalobah, but a loan couldn't be agreed. But I can tell you pretty firmly from different sources that Chalobah's not just going to go for the sake of going. Chalobah's only going to go if he gets a club with European football and it's in the right kind of location and obviously matches his Chelsea package and wage. So if it's up to Chalobah, he wants to stay and fight for his place. But if James is fit and with Malo Gusto, he's not going to get any game time on the right side. And then you look at the centre-backs and you think Fofana and Colwell might be the starting pairing. And then you've still got Badiashile and Disasi. Another centre-back could come in too. So Chalobah will have to speak to Maresca in order to understand his pathways and his game time. And that may inform whether or not he's more willing to leave. But as of right now, before any conversations with Maresca, Chalobah's not going to be forced out. Chalobah's content at Chelsea. Chalobah wants to stay for as long as he can. So if Chelsea want to get rid of Chalobah, the recruitment team and Chalobah's agents are going to have to find a very specific kind of club because Chalobah's going to be picky.
One that seems a little more straightforward, just given commentary, is Ian Maatsen, who's obviously going to play the Champions League final on Saturday for Borussia Dortmund. This is a player that has a buyout clause, and Dortmund seemingly want to keep him around. Does this deal get done at 35 million?
Not at 35 million for sure. That's the release clause, and Chelsea will point to the fact that Burnley had an offer accepted at 31.5 million and the release clause isn't much more than that. And Maatsen's had a phenomenal season and is in a Champions League final. But the Dortmund starting position is close to 25 million and they're playing on the fact they believe that Chelsea need to sell. A starting position would always likely go a bit higher. So my sense is that if the release clause is not met, then there'll be a compromise close to or at the 30 million mark. I don't see Dortmund just triggering the clause. And I do see a bit of flexibility from Chelsea's perspective because they've got in a little bit of money through the original loan and the wages being covered. So the 35 million is there as quite an ambitious yardstick. And when he wasn't playing at Chelsea and he chose not to go to Burnley, the 35 million felt quite high. Now he's done so well at Dortmund and he's one of their, if not their top priority. You think it's a no-brainer at 35 million, but it wouldn't surprise me if the negotiations end up being framed a little bit less. And as long as Chelsea put in a strong structure where they're getting a healthy guaranteed fee, they're getting easily gettable add-ons, they're getting a sell-on fee, potentially, if he ever goes elsewhere. I think the parties might get it done in the high 20s or early 30 millions, even though, at least now, because we're so early in the window, you would expect Chelsea to be quite bullish and stick to the clause, because Dortmund are not short on money. They've still got the Bellingham money. They've qualified already for the Champions League because Germany got one of the 5th place spots. They're in the Champions League final. That's another payday as well. So this isn't a club that can really say, we can't afford this. You've got to reduce the price or we're walking. Dortmund could probably afford to pay 50 million for Ian Maatsen, but they're tough negotiators. So I think Dortmund and Maatsen are on the same page. They want to continue their chapter together. It's just about whether or not anything is possible beneath the release clause. And I think at the end of the day, it might be, because Chelsea accepted 31.5 million. If Dortmund offered 31.5 million, I think the deal would get done.
Another really interesting one, and then we'll do some rapid fire because there's a lot of potential here. You reported that, or you and Nazar reported that Omari Hutchinson is an interesting prospect. Obviously, with Ipswich kind of retaining their structure and him having such a great loan there at during last season, this is obviously someone that could be really attractive for about 25 million pounds, up and comer, very young, super talent for someone like Ipswich coming up. So I'm curious, does Chelsea cash in? Do they try and involve him in the summer? Like, how do you see that going with Ipswich?
Yeah, I think Omari Hutchinson is a player that Ipswich want to keep. And now that Kieran McKenna's on the brink of signing, that might even be announced by the time you're watching this. It's one to watch. It's just whether or not Ipswich can afford that 25 million valuation that I'm told Chelsea are looking for. And Chelsea would be open to a permanent sale. The Ipswich perspective is perhaps to have another loan with a option to buy that turns into an obligation if they stay in the Premier League. And I think Hutchinson would be more comfortable with that structure from what I'm told, because it means that he wouldn't join permanently and then find that he's in the Championship the season after next if Ipswich go down. So that's a win-win-win, because it's an obligation for Chelsea if Ipswich stay up. It's a loan with an option. Otherwise, it means that Hutchinson doesn't have to fear that he'll be in the Championship. And then Chelsea just have to determine whether or not that's good enough financially and whether they're prepared to take the risk, because Ipswich, of course, could go down. We have to say there's a likelihood of that because they're one of the newly promoted sides. Whereas if Chelsea can just get a fee now, they don't have to care about the permutations of what happens with the club where Hutchinson goes. But I would expect Ipswich to be in the conversation. I think Stuttgart I still want to watch and are pushing very hard as well. And Hutchinson's not against going abroad. So those are the main two at the moment that I'm hearing about. But Hutchinson loved it at Ipswich and under McKenna. So if it can be made to work at Ipswich under the right circumstances, then I do think he would be persuaded to go back there.
All right, so there's obviously a lot more on the outs between your Lewis Halls that are certainly moving on, Broya, Kepa, Lukaku, Ziyech. We'll do more of those as we move through the summer. Chelsea have already, seemingly snatched up Esteval Willian from Brazil. Goalkeeper is a fascinating one, Ben, because of Maresca's system, as you potentially said earlier. Philip Jorgensen and Valencia's Georgi Mashmartashvili. I don't know if I said that right, but that's a interesting one. Bento is another one that you're hearing. What's on the goalkeeper?
Yeah, Mamadashvili and Jorgensen are the two to watch. People say Maresca won't have any say in recruitment, but it's never that black and white. So the role will be the same as Pochettino, no enhanced role and no veto or autonomy. But the two-way aspect is down to the fact that if Maresca plays in a way where the goalkeeper joins the centre-backs, you need a fast goalkeeper who's comfortable outside of his box. And it's a different kind of goalkeeper to sweep a keeper, which is what we saw Neto do, rushing off his line, and then Caicedo scored that worldie from the halfway line. But this is a calmer goalkeeper that's just used to being on the ball regularly. And we saw that at Leicester, and regularly outside of the box, again, allowing the centre-backs to move further forward. So that may mean that from Maresca's point of view, after assessing the squad, he says there's room for a number one. and then the recruitment team will say, okay, we'll go out and find a number one. So that's how the football team can communicate upwards to the recruitment team. It may be the recruitment team say, we want another name, but it suits your style. And Maresca says, okay, we've had a debate over it, and that's who we're going with. So there's no autonomy again, but it's not just recruitment team picking and then Maresca says, okay, here's the pieces of the puzzle. They look at his style and he inputs. And this is why goalkeeper may become a bit of a priority. And Villarreal's Philip Jorgensen is one possible target, although I'd keep a very close eye on Newcastle United as well, because they've already held some talks with his agent. And then Valencia's Georgi Mamashvili is another name that Chelsea not only appreciate, but have done for quite some time. But they're 22 and 23 respectively. So then that raises a pathway question. What does Jordi Petrovic think, having been the number one, if he's no longer the number one? What does Robert Sanchez think if another goalkeeper comes in? And we know that they're trying to get Kepa out of the football club as well. So goalkeepers are tough because there's a domino effect. And as soon as you bring in a number one, you might find you need another number two because of what the other players think. They might not all be prepared to have healthy competition if they think they're not going to play that many games, although Europa Conference League football and the fact that there's the Club World Cup means that Chelsea could have 70 odd games. So hopefully there will be some opportunities for goalkeepers to play in FA Cup, League Cup, and so on. But still, if there's a defined number one, then it does raise questions over some of the other goalkeepers. And then we know a midfielder might be possible if Conor Gallagher leaves. Striker-wise, the door's not totally shut on Victor Osimhen, but it's the combination of fee plus wages. And Napoli want the release clause. There are some rumours that it might be Romelu Lukaku involved in a swap deal. And they come from the fact that Giovanni Manna is incoming as the new sporting director at Napoli. And he was the guy at Juventus that was pushing for Lukaku when it went from Inter to Juventus, to Inter getting annoyed that Lukaku was talking to Juventus and then subsequently going to Roma. But Manna was the guy at Juventus saying, why not Lukaku? So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Napoli come in for Lukaku. But right now, De Laurentiis is very much like release clause or nothing. And then Osimhen's got wage demand of 250k, whereas Benjamin Sesko is the one I'd keep an eye on, along with Arsenal, Manchester United and PSG, because the fee's lower. The release clause is variable, so it's gone up further, and now it's in the region of 65 million euros, so about 55 million quid. But that's still half the price of Osimhen and half the wages of Osimhen, which naturally makes it a more cost-effective deal. And then if they can find a cheap defender, which is where the Tosin links come from, buy a young left-back, and I would keep an eye on Milos Kirkos and Rayan Ait-Nouri as two potential options, then they've got a little bit of money suddenly to go big on either a lead striker, and maybe that does change their mind and they say, okay, we will try for Victor Osimhen instead of Benjamin Sesko, or maybe they put some of their money into an Elise type player who's long been rumoured as coming back to Chelsea after the original deal fell through. But that's a 60 to 65 million outlay if the release clause is triggered. So I would look at Chelsea's incomings as balancing act. It's not just about whose value and can we get them. It's about if we get them, how much money is left for the other 4 or 5 that we want to bring into the football club.
Well, Ben, really appreciate your time today. We're going to move to wrap up. We know that you're very, very, very busy as transfer season is kicked off. Chelsea fans, please shoot Ben a note of thanks. And until next time, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.